just a few more words of background. Thanks again for the introduction, and thanks, Donald, for setting the stage so nicely. You will find that there is quite a thread running through Joe's introduction, Donald's keynote, and what I have to say here. As mentioned, I'm a linguist by training, and that, in a sense, was an advantageous start for me, because interdisciplinarity has never been an issue for me, but rather was my breeding ground and my training. Linguistics is a very young field. It's not even a discipline. It's scholars from many different directions, whether they are philosophers, psychologists, cognitive scientists, or historians, who all interrogate questions about language. So being able to talk across disciplines was always something that was pretty much in the 101 training of linguistics, and that for me has been a very interesting journey. In terms of belonging and where we come from and what defines as well, I don't know if I'm one of those 3 Italians on the map, but I was certainly born in Italy. I learned my English in a German school, which is why a lot of people think that I'm actually South African. And I lived more than half my life outside Italy, and in fact, more than half my life outside Europe altogether. I really don't have a home. And I've always been extremely comfortable with that. For me, not having a home has always meant that I really never have a place that I think is somewhat more important than another. That for me has defined a lot of things that I do. Now, the last 5 years, almost 6 years after I left the University of Hong Kong, I've been basically involved in what we like to call higher education leadership in Australia. And I have a bit more to say about that. But one thing that, if you look at the Australian academic panorama, you will see is that nowadays, a majority of the mission statements of universities in Australia have something to do with changing the future, improving the future, making a positive contribution to where we are going. And this is a bit of a change, because when you look at the history of universities, established universities, where you look at Bologna or Cambridge or Harvard, usually the original statements that you find in those universities have more to do with knowledge and wisdom and awareness than actually doing something that has an immediate action on a certain type of society. And so one of the things that interests me is interrogating whether, especially modern universities and especially neoliberal universities, as the ones that dominate the Australian landscape, and for that matter, much of the UK landscape, are the right tools to really create a better future. And I think that it's really important to interrogate this question, because you know how the West, and in particular the Anglophone West, has this annoying tendency of trying to tell everybody else how things are done. And it often succeeds with it too. And so I think it's really important to go to contexts where certain type of changes may not yet have happened, and actually share whether those changes have something good and positive for us, or whether they involve some threats that we should be aware of. So first of all, if you really want to create a better future, you should ask yourself, what does a better future look like? Do we agree on what a better future look like? Because, for example, if you approach that question ideologically, you could say that a better future is Marxist utopia, or a world filled with Christianity, or whatever. And obviously, you will have some rather divergent opinions about it. So if we sit down as humanists and social scientists, as we basically are here, we probably can go beyond ideologies and start asking us, okay, what are some of the things that, let's ask ourselves, what are the things that I wish for my children, for the next generation? Well, if I think of that, I can think of 3 things that I would really like to leave to future generations, and that is less poverty, less violence, and a huge elephant in every room, a slightly more stable climate. Now, I'm going to speak a bit more about poverty and violence than climate, simply because there is a lot of talk about climate nowadays, and I think we are all pretty much aware. But I think that it's really important to realize how we as humanists, as social scientists, have so much to say about the causes of poverty and the causes of violence, issues of social justice, issues of education and mobility, issues of security and of development and of stability. These are all things that I'm sure this room is filled with expertise about. And by that, when we teach these things in our universities, when we train future generations to understand, to critically understand, to be able to navigate across the different interpretations of these issues, we might have a chance to give them some agency onto a better future. So this connects to what Donald was saying about the importance of the training that we offer in these disciplines, and the fact that by being knowledgeable and articulate about those very matters, you do have a role to play in contemporary and future society. Of course, we have to be careful about this, because in this room, we do share probably a set of worldviews that are much closer together because of where we come from intellectually than others. Because if you are that kid there, and if that is your upbringing, your worldview is going to look quite a bit different than ours here. And if your upbringing and your current reality is defined by daily violence or by repression, again, your worldview is going to be quite a bit different. We might still, at the end of the day, think of some fundamental issues such as poverty and violence, but we might have different answers about how we want to go about tackle those and the role of education in those matters. But that doesn't mean that we, as university leaders and as university teachers and researchers, can't address that too. In fact, we are specialists in history, in culture, in education, in economy, in environment, in relations. These are all the very disciplines that allow us to tackle issues of poverty, issues of violence in very sophisticated ways, in ways that are cross-cultural, that are respectful, and that acknowledge the importance of other points of view. The idea that language training is all about language, incidentally, one of the big Australian universities is evolving its rather large language program because students won't achieve fluency anyway. Now, that is the narrow-minded interpretation of what languages actually do. It doesn't even consider the much more important job of studying languages, which is to understand other people's viewpoints, other people's ways of thinking, reasoning, and approaching reality. So again, we have all these things. We are experts in that. And if we make a point of seriously preparing our students to navigate these, we can make a significant contribution to a better future. Now, there are people out there who actually will question why would universities want to contribute to a better future? Is it really your mission to do so? There are people out there who are perfectly comfortable with this picture. There are people out there who are perfectly comfortable with what Donald has referred to as a retrogradous kind of movement, because people will argue that actually, history is not linear. Humanity is not on a track of progress. History is circular, and these things come back all the time. If you or others are happy to embrace this picture of the future, then obviously the answer to my original question is in the negative. I don't think there are many people here who are quite happy and willing to go for that. Fantastic. Now, I should say also that when we think about whether universities are in a good position to tackle such issues, we need to understand that there are actually quite different types of institutions. There are institutions that are much more interdisciplinary in their outset. There are institutions that focus on really training students and giving degrees, while there are other institutions that focus more on delivering high impact research. And then, especially in the last number of decades, we have seen the rise of many, many comprehensive universities, which have their own value in trying to bring all those different tribes under the same roof. And if they do it well, that in itself is a really good contribution to intellectual and disciplinary diversity. And then there are the corporate universities, which are the most modern incarnation in many ways of universities, which you see dominating the UK landscape and completely dominating the Australian landscape. If you're familiar with the history of Australia, Australia is particularly good at following in UK's footpath, but actually do it worse and to an extreme degree. And this is really what has happened in the higher education panorama of Australia. Now, I will argue that any of these is in a good position to deliver a better future, with probably the exception of the last one, by and large. And that is because of some very, very serious, deep issues of structure and governance that a liberal university has. A liberal university, for those of you who are, like you, not familiar with it, is dominated by a corporate culture. It has a story. It's usually a very simple and very strong story that everyone adheres to and that everyone repeats from the top to the bottom through the generations of students. A corporate university is very expensive because the corporate side of it requires massive resources and energies in promoting, innovating, publicizing the corporate identity, which in an environment where support for education is constantly declining is a very, very challenging element. Corporate university tends to standardize education. The ideal of a corporate neoliberal university is that everything is there for anyone to use, and that you could extract lecture A from program A and plug that person in a different program as a different lecturer, because all materials are there anyway. The university owns anything, and therefore it doesn't really matter who does what. Because corporate university needs to maximize profit, obviously it's much better to invest in certain disciplines rather than others. And you know the end of that story, and you know which disciplines are the ones with fewer students that are not worth investing in, obviously. Because it listens to the market, it does certain things more than others, and in a sense is not a critical and independent thinker of the sector. And then there are a number of selective ethical issues which have to do with how resources are being distributed. The huge salaries that are paid at some ends of the governments, but not at others, being one of them. So to just go into a couple of these, the issue with the corporate culture, it might work very well in a whole number of sectors out there, absolutely, but it's antithetical to promoting diversity. If you want to have one narrative, and if you want to make that narrative competitive and hierarchical, you immediately discourage a diversity of voices and a diversity of opinions. So that's one big hindrance. As I was saying, in an environment that is financially constrained, when more than half of the resources go into the corporate side of things, that means that they don't go into the teaching and they don't go into the research. And that is a problem. Corporate universities are expensive. How are you going to create a better future if the first thing that you do is that you create a generation of indebted people? It's going to be a hard future to make better. How are you going to prepare students for the basic challenges of humanities when you constantly cut the very disciplines that inform how to go about understanding those challenges and creating solutions to them, the social scientists and the humanity. Diversity in corporate university is about money. You want internationalization because it brings you more money, because the students pay more. It's not about inclusion. There is one fundamental color to diversity. It's the color of money, those who can and those who cannot. And the corporate university is not positioned to address that. Because corporate universities are so reliant on making profit, they will obviously tend to be industry-led in both research and teaching, which, and I want to be clear here, industry partnerships between academia and industry, between academia and technology, between academia and community are fantastic and wonderful things and must be maximized. It's a different matter when universities become industry-led, in the sense they do the things that they know will get them somewhere from the point of view of the dominant players in a given society. So because of these things, I would argue that if you find the neoliberal corporate university attractive, you should think again. And you will find it attractive. And this is why I'm here to warn you that you should be very careful. Just look at these numbers. In the last 5 years, 56% of Australian universities have increased their competitiveness in these famous or infamous global rankings. So they've done really well. And the students want to go there because of this. And in exactly the same time, Australian research has fallen by 16%. Compare that to what has happened in China. You can compare it to what is happening in Japan, which is in the positive. So you see the two tendencies there tell you one thing, that the corporate university is very good at playing its game, but that actually the underlying production and the underlying achievements tell a completely different story. Look at the low of R&D investment in Australia in just 2 years ago. Again, compare it with Japan's today. And just this year, the finance minister in Australia let us all know that in the next 20 years, Australia's growth in terms of creativity, technology, and industry is forecast at half of the last 20 years. And surprise, surprise, the neoliberal university in Australia is about 20 years old. So these are the numbers for you to really think carefully about. I think my time is almost up, so I'm gonna get up. So, we are all asking ourselves these days, what is the core business of education? Well, I can tell you what it is not: profit. Which is why all universities are still, at least on paper, known as not-for-profit. Profit, in my view, pretty much undermines the core business of higher education. Higher education is about understanding. It's about communicating, and crucially, and that is one thing that, if I may, in some of our approaches in humanities and the social sciences, we still don't pay enough attention to. It's not just about educating students to understand and communicate. It's about also helping them to understand how to resolve issues. One of the things that I like to ask my students in any class I teach or used to teach is, what if you are wrong? Or what if your neighbor is right? Or what else could be true? Accept a frame of mind in which it is not about being right or wrong, but about how do we resolve the differences that we have on this particular issue, and how do we continue living together and collaborating? That, to me, is a value of education. Of course, there is the research production, the knowledge side of things. We must continue producing knowledge, not just the knowledge that the industry ABC wants, but any knowledge. Because 5 years ago, if you as a university administrator were asked to underwrite a research grant for several millions on bats, you might have thought, oh my goodness me, why would we research bats? It turned out it came in really handy, right? So we must have blue sky research because we don't know what happens next. And of course, we need to train students with very basic skills because they need to go on in life and make a living. This is the core business of education. Everything else is really peripheral. I think that the thing that we need to shift the dial on in a lot of universities that tomorrow's better futures build on coexistence and not on competition. We tend to be attracted by competition. We think it's a positive force. We think it may make our institutions more resilient. We think it might make our students more competitive. But I think that we exaggerate competition and we underplay coexistence, doing things together, not doing things to see who is the first and who is the last, or who is the winner and who is the loser. We need to practice diversity on an everyday basis. And we, as scholars of our disciplines, are in the best position of teaching our kids how to practice diversity, harmonious diversity, collaborative diversity, not competitive. So the thing is that if we don't build it into the very core of our institutions, our students won't buy what we have to tell them. And I see this every day in Australian academia. Our students see how senior management acts and decides without their participation in anything that they do, or for that matter, without academic staff participation. And they read it and they don't buy it because they're not stupid. They might be young, but they're definitely not stupid. So you can't just talk the talk, you need to walk the walk. So next time you get the ear of your vice chancellor, or when you become the next vice chancellor, or if I become a next vice chancellor, if I had to give a few practical action points, it would be these. Strive for fundamental training that, first of all, empowers students to be citizens of the future in the most basic things that they need. Design peace, social change, mutual aids as building blocks of whatever you teach. Get your students to work within that. Practice diversity, understanding, and conflict resolution, not just understanding, but resolve. Diversify your mission. Not every institution or university need to do everything. There are local realities. There are global realities. There is so much to choose from. Universities can be different. They should dare to be different, not all the same. Do inclusion properly, not just about including the richest kids outside there in the world. Open up in hybrid modes at least some of the opportunities to kids that can't travel, that can't go anywhere. It could be not going to a different country, but it could just be not coming to campus because they need to hold a job most of the week. We can use these technologies now. And throughout the structure of the organization, from the top to the bottom and in the student bodies, seriously, genuinely work on the respect. These would be my action points. Do I still have a minute or am I over time?
No, you have a minute.
Well, I was quite moved.
5 minutes.
5 minutes, that's fantastic. Well, I was quite moved by the very personal touch that some of Donald's remarks had. So I'm going to just give a full disclosure, which I hadn't actually planned to do. But I transited to a neoliberal university system in Australia after having spent nearly a decade in Hong Kong at the University of Hong Kong, which I still consider my alma mater because despite the fact that I did my PhD in Europe, in order to support my PhD, I was actually working as a research assistant in Hong Kong almost for the entire time I was doing my PhD. And the reason why I ended up in Hong Kong is that my expertise is in Asian languages. That I studied Mandarin at university, had to learn Cantonese in Hong Kong, but that's a different story. And I was really attracted to the idea of entering senior leadership in university because I believe in these things and because I wanted to keep making a change. But I really found a very different reality in Australia and And I realized that, well, I can probably hold these kind of roles down for 5 to 6 years, but that's probably going to be the most I can do. And in fact, the disappointment with particularly the neoliberal system of education got so big for me that at the end of last year, I quit my job. I just decided that I can't do this anymore. I have to step down because this is so completely different from where I actually want to go. And I just have to find a different way of doing this, or perhaps a different place where I can do this, but I can definitely not continue doing that. So sometimes that radical move is also a possibility. So now I have a beautiful independent website and lovely name cards, which I'm happy to give to you later. And I think that also led me to really realize about the importance of addressing the issue of what are different models of education and what are our philosophies of education, where do we want to go and where do we want to bring them. And not every place and not every structure is really in the right place to contribute to a better future, if this is where we want to go, of course. And so with that, I stop with a few minutes to spare. I will say, domo arigatou gozaimasu, and I'll leave the field to question.